Good afternoon and welcome to Leading in a Time of Crisis with John Phelps, presented by the ABA Division for Bar Services and the National Conference of Bar Presidents. We're delighted you're able to join us today for leadership and governance guidance from John Phelps during these uncertain times. First, I just want to share a couple of housekeeping items with you. Everyone's lines are muted. However, we encourage you to submit questions at any point during the webinar by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. John will address as many questions as possible as time permits. Any additional questions will be sent to John after the session, and he will respond offline. As I mentioned, our presenter is John Phelps. John is the owner and founder of Pathfinder Executive Consulting, LLC, a small veteran-owned business focused on helping organizations achieve success. Before establishing his own consulting firm, John served as Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the State Bar of Arizona. And I will now turn it over to John.
Thanks, Joanne. And greetings from Phoenix to all of you that have tuned in this morning and this afternoon for some of you on the other side of the country. I first extend my best wishes to all of you and your friends and family during this difficult time. I hope all of you are well. I'm a bit humbled by today's topic, leading in a time of crisis. I don't necessarily consider myself an expert on the topic. I've had some experience for sure, and have had the chance to see some great leaders handle crisis situations. I'm guessing you've tuned in because leadership is a lifelong pursuit for you, as it is for me. I'm going to share some things from my own experience, in addition to having served as the Chief Executive Officer of the State Bar of Arizona, and before that, the Chief of Staff of the U.S. General Services Administration. I served as the Chief Operating Officer for the American Red Cross here in Arizona during Hurricane Katrina and a number of wildfires here in the state. Also helped establish the Office of Homeland Security, which is now the Department of Homeland Security in the state of Arizona. And prior to that, I spent about 25 years in the United States Army, and I was involved in a number of crisis situations there and disaster response and recovery. So I'm going to draw from all of those experiences today. As Joanne mentioned, I'm going to go for 40 or 45 minutes and then open it up for questions. And so we'll be collecting those questions as we go, so you can send those in, and then I'll try to tackle those. And as Joanne mentioned, I'm happy to follow up with any of you that might have questions or comments about what we're going to talk about today. So let's get started. I think Colin Powell's quote about leadership is spot on. He's one of my favorite leaders and someone who I have followed throughout his career, read all of his books. I commend his books to you if you haven't read them. But leadership is really all about people, not about organizations, not about plans, not about strategies. Certainly all of those things are important, but at the end of the day, it really is about the soft skills, and leadership is about understanding people, connecting with people, inspiring people, motivating people. And so much of what I'm going to talk about today really follows that theme, which is really talking about how we lead people. Not that hard skills aren't also important, and particularly during a crisis situation like this, where there are so many unknowns, really understanding the complexity of the problem, understanding the facts, doing the analysis, the assessment, reaching out to the right people. All of those things are important as well. And so we bring, as lawyers, as bar leaders, our analytical skills and our ability to take complex problems and break them down into essential components to make decisions are important as well. But I'm going to talk an awful lot about soft skills today. So I think this is the big question that all of us are asking. What am I supposed to do in my role as a bar leader? And I'm going to give you some suggestions and some observations from my experience, but many of you have some important lessons to share, I'm sure, as well. So I am by no means going to cover all of the landscape today, but I'm going to give you what I can give you in terms of my own experience. So I think the first answer to this question, what am I supposed to do, really starts with you. My experience is that if you're not well, if you aren't healthy, if you aren't taking care of yourself, then your ability to make good decisions is really diminished. And so as much as leadership is about inspiring and motivating and guiding and really helping others on the team and within our organizations move together in a unified way, we really have to start with ourselves, in my opinion. And so what does that mean? It means we've got to get some sleep. And sleep, I know, is a tough commodity. It's a short commodity. And sometimes during times of crisis, we cut ourselves short. We tend to think that, we need to stay up all night or burn the midnight oil or really cut sleep short because it's not productive. And study after study over the years, have validated the idea or the actual factual finding, scientific finding, that sleep-deprived folks don't make good decisions. And so really making sure that you get adequate sleep, particularly during times of crisis, is important. Exercise, tough to do. All the gyms are closed. I was talking to Joanne before we started the session this morning, and she mentioned that the lakefront's been closed in Chicago and state parks and city parks. So how do we do that? But I don't have necessarily all of the answers on how do you do that, but finding a way to move our bodies every day and get up from our chairs, from the laptop, move, exercise. Again, study after study, the research shows that movement, daily movement, helps clear our minds, helps us be more creative, more innovative. And again, during times of crisis, creativity and innovation are really key to solving complex problems. Diet, I think about my days in the Army. In the old days, we wouldn't get any sleep, no exercise, and we'd go for 24, 36 hours. And our diet was coffee and cigarettes. Well, even the Army figured out that that's not a very good way to sustain oneself or to put oneself in a position to make good decisions. And so paying attention to our diet, I'm guessing a lot of us that may have eaten out more are now having to cook as long as the grocery stores stay open. And so really paying attention to diet, just like sleep and exercise, very important. Hydration, I'm going to demonstrate that for everyone right now. Hydration is really important. Again, a little ice cube there. All of the studies have continued to show that maintaining good hydration during the day is also important for mental functions and physical functions. Relationships, especially folks that are single, may not have all of the family moving back into the house during this time. Really maintaining relationships. I don't know about you, but I'm making use of FaceTime and Zoom and Skype to really connect with folks, at least see them visually, but to really maintain those relationships during these times of crisis. And there are a lot of good reasons for that, not only emotional health and well-being, but also our relationships are really a source of information and a source of validation. And sometimes we need a pep talk or two from our close friends and family. And lastly, establishing a new tempo. I don't know about you, but this has been a little bit difficult for me. I'm a person of routine, get up at the same time every day, go to the gym, come back, get some work done. I'm sure all of you are accustomed to certain routines. Lawyers have to have routines in place. All of that's been disrupted. And so I think reestablishing a tempo and coming up with a routine and some consistency, again, helps you be a more healthy person, but also a better leader. So I think my bottom line point here, not to belabor it, is that you really have to take care of yourself if you're going to be a good leader. But if not you, who? So this is, for those New York Yankee fans out there, this is Mariano Rivera, arguably the greatest relief pitcher in baseball. You're not invincible, and in a crisis like this, and a disaster that involves a pandemic, the truth is, I may get the virus, you may get the virus, or a family member may get the virus, and you're taken away from your day-to-day activities to really focus on making sure your family member, your friend is taken care of. But we need to have backups. And when we talk about succession planning, I know the ABA has talked about that for years, has put on various programs at various conferences. Now, more than ever, we really need to have a true succession plan in place. And so who is it that steps in if you're a bar president or you're a bar executive? Who is it that's going to step in if you're taken out of the mix? And so my advice here is that you have identified a backup, but also that person is fully informed, included in the loop as you wrestle with the different issues that your bar association is wrestling with, that person is on the conference call, in the Zoom meeting, whatever it takes to keep your backup, your relief pitcher in the loop. And so that's really important. And again, we're all susceptible to this virus. And so maybe even having a backup to the backup would be a great idea. All right, hopefully that all makes sense. So we talked about taking care of yourself and also having a backup relief pitcher. Am I still working, Joanne? Are we still on
Yep,
the conference?
you're good. You're good.
All right. So for all the folks that are watching, I have a deal with Joanne worked out so that she lets me know that this thing is still working. So I'm not like on the cell phone where the call drops and you talk for 10 minutes and realize that the person on the other end of the line has dropped off. We're going to try to avoid that. So I'll check in with her from time to time. Now that we've talked about you and your backup, let's talk about leadership fundamentals. And I think leadership fundamentals are really no different in times of non-crisis. I think they are amplified during a time of crisis. So much of what I'm going to talk about probably is not new, not going to be new material, not going to be new ideas, but hopefully gives you an opportunity and gives me an opportunity to focus on some of these leadership fundamentals that really require some more attention during a time of crisis. I'm going to give you the list first, and then we'll talk about each of them individually. The first is to maintain and model calm and confidence. We'll talk a little bit about how to do that. The second is our listening skills, in my view, are really essential. And if ever there was a time to listen more than talk, it's during a time of crisis. We will all be given opportunities and need to talk and need to give direction and guidance, but listening is particularly important during these kinds of situations. Empathy, sometimes we don't talk about empathy very much, and I want to talk a little bit about that today, but I think it's important to demonstrate empathy, empathize. And then the Achilles heel, even during times of non-crisis, during times of peace, communication is a challenge. All of you are bar leaders. You know that I'm guessing that every time you have a strategy session, at least the strategy sessions that I sat in for 10 years and some of the work I'm doing now, when you ask the Board of Governors, what's our number one challenge and our number one problem? What's the answer? Communication. So communication, it doesn't change as a priority during times of crisis. In fact, it becomes even more. So I've repeated it 3 times here. And then making decisions. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time in the time I've been given talking about making decisions, because I think honestly, this is one of the more difficult tasks during times of crisis. We have a tendency as leaders to hold back because decisions are more risky. And the timing isn't what we'd like it to be. We may be given less time to make decisions and less information than we'd like to normally have. And so we'll talk a little bit about some fundamentals there. And then lastly, 2 qualities that I think are really essential during these times is humility and forbearance. We'll talk a little bit about those qualities. If you want a case study, in my opinion, to look at somebody that's doing this from my perspective, very well. I'd commend to you Governor Andrew Cuomo's daily press briefings. They're usually on in the morning. I think a number of networks carry them. But he is, in my view, he's doing all the right kinds of things and demonstrating the kind of leadership. And so if you want to see somebody that's applying these principles on a real-time basis and really adapting to the daily changes in information and environment, I'd commend his daily press briefing. So calm. How do we maintain a sense of calm and confidence? First, I guess we should all recognize and agree that we are billboards as leaders. We're projecting always everything we do, everything we say. Of course, body language doesn't play as much of a part today because we're all isolated, but even on a Zoom conference like this, our body language and facial expressions are sending messages, right? And so we are first, it's first and foremost important to realize that we are projecting all the time as leaders. And so what are we projecting? We can project this, which is not what we want to project, but we need to think about, are we projecting anxiety or fear or sort of a lack of hope or depression? We may feel those things deep down, and I think under the current situation, we'd all have to confess that we feel like this from time to time, right? And so what do we do about that? How do we go from fear and anxiety or dealing with our own sense of hopelessness and being overwhelmed to this image really of calm and confidence? I don't have all the answers. You're going to figure that out if you haven't figured that out pretty quickly. There's no easy solution to this challenge of maintaining our own sense of calm and confidence during these difficult times. This sounds simple, but honestly, it works. And again, these things are probably pretty rudimentary for some of you or all of us, but taking a deep breath. Before we started our session today, I took a couple of deep breaths. And before you engage with your board or members or family or friends or clients, fill in the blank, you are a leader. You're seen as a leader. And so taking a deep breath, settling yourself, finding ways to clear your mind, all of the things we talked about at the very beginning regarding how we take care of ourselves. If we do those things, it's easier to be calm and collected and confident. Get those endorphins going. And then sometimes you just have to give yourself a pep talk. You have to still your spirit, and it's like that old SNL skit where the guy's looking in the mirror and telling himself that he's a wonderful person. Sometimes we have to do that. And then, friends and family, spouses, best friends, significant others, those are people that can really cheer us up and give us a shot in the arm when we need it. Coaches and mentors. This is a great time to reach out to our coaches and mentors that we've acquired over the years and get their guidance and get a shot in the arm from them. The truth of the matter is sometimes during a crisis, panic is worse than the overall disaster that we're facing. I'm not so sure that that's necessarily the case now, but I think panic is we're seeing it, right? We're seeing panic with people going to the grocery store and hoarding water and toilet paper. I get the water. I don't understand the toilet paper, but people are panicking. And so we, as leaders, can be a source of calm and confidence that can reduce that level of panic and chaos, at least within the area of influence where our leadership is operating. I hope that makes sense to everyone. We can talk a little bit more, maybe during the questions and answers, about what some of you are doing to maintain a sense of calm and confidence. One of the things I'm doing is not leaving the news on because it is constant and continuous. Also, putting this thing away every once in a while so it's not constantly pinging updates about, how bad things are going. There is hope, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The next fundamental leadership skill or quality is the need to listen. And who should we be listening to? Well, there's this guy. He probably had no idea that he would become a household name during his career. But listening to experts, as we, as leaders and bar leaders, make decisions about the things that we need to make decisions about, really tapping into those people that know the details and the science or the facts and figures about a particular issue that we're facing. Not shooting from the hip. It doesn't mean we don't have to move quickly sometimes, but we need to rely on experts. Relying on our team. Sometimes we as leaders can feel like, hey, look, everybody's looking at me. I've got to have the answers. I'm like the lion on Wizard of Oz. I'm the king of the forest, and I have to be brave, and I have to be the one with all the answers. This is a time to listen to our teams, right? And when I say team, that's broad. That can be bar staff. It can be your board of governors. It can be other folks, again, in your kind of sphere of influence and operations. And really listen to what they have to say, what ideas they might have about how to handle a situation. I'll never forget when I was with the American Red Cross and we had set up a shelter to handle Katrina evacuees. And we had hospice people that were flown in from New Orleans. And we didn't have hospital beds for them. And so one of my jobs as the operations director for the shelter was to go out and get hospital beds, and they were in short supply, much like the conversations you're hearing now about ventilators for hospitals. And I didn't go out to our team to ask them if they had any ideas, because I figured, it was my responsibility and I was a leader. Well, in the middle of the night, walking through the shelter, I saw a number of volunteers building out of wooden pallets and mattresses and blankets, makeshift hospital beds. And they put the hospice patients to bed and got them rested. And I thought, what an amazing initiative and creativity being demonstrated there that I had failed to really reach out and tap into. And so our teams have innovative ideas and creative ideas and solutions that we really need to listen to during these kinds of times. And then honest brokers, advisors, friends, close friends, again, spouses, significant others, people that will really tell us what they really think and what they really think about how we're doing and the decisions that we're thinking about making. Having somebody that's not going to tell you what you want to hear, but really tell you the honest truth about either what you're doing or what you're thinking about doing is critical during these kinds of situations. I'm reminded of the story of the hippo and the elephant. That you look at the hippo, and the largest, biggest characteristic on the hippo is the mouth, and the biggest characteristic of the elephant is the ears. I guess my admonition to all of us is we need to be more elephant than hippo during times of crisis. Empathy. Why is empathy important? And, I think there's a tendency to think that when we're in a leadership position and there's a disaster that we're dealing with, or crisis that we're dealing with, the approach is to say, we don't need any snibblers, just pull up your big boy pants and get moving. And, I don't really need to think about or care about how somebody's feeling, whether somebody's in stress, distressed, but really we just need to get moving. I think that's the wrong approach. And again, I commend Governor Cuomo's approach. In every press briefing, he demonstrates that he understands what people are going through. He tells his own personal stories about his own family situation. He tells stories about other people that he's met and communicated with, but expressing to your team, to your board, to your members, right? If some of you are sending messages out to your members, and we'll talk about communication here in a minute, that you let them know in a genuine and an authentic way, in an authentic way, that you're empathetic, that you feel what they feel and you understand what they're going through. Why is that important? Well, it's important because that really breeds a sense of loyalty, and it makes it easier to share hard news. And as a leader during a crisis or during a disaster, sharing hard news and giving the hard facts is part of what we do. And it's not easy, and sometimes it's not popular. But if you express the sense that you know that people are facing their own challenges and that you get that, it goes a long way to really influencing the organization or moving the organization in the direction that it needs to go. So let's now talk about communication. Sorry, I clicked a little bit too quickly there. Communication, and many of you as bar leaders are already communicating to your board, to your members. Executive directors are communicating to the staff. Maybe some of you bar presidents are communicating to staff as well. I think that's a good idea, a joint show of strength and leadership and unity. That's always good. Communication is the Achilles heel of every organization, every human organization. Until the robots take over, I think communication is something that's always going to be a challenge. And maybe when the robots take over, it'll be a challenge too. But lots of channels of communication, right? So we talked a little bit about how we look, our body language, our facial expressions. We still use this thing on occasion, how we communicate over the telephone, email, of course, applications like this, Zoom and others that are online. Written communications. This is a recent order from our Arizona Supreme Court. Our websites, right? Our websites are a great place to send out information and communication. Social media, I think this is an apt image, right? So much on social media now is just so scary. So, oh my gosh, you know, the world is coming to an end. I just don't think that's true, but lots going on in social media. And then there's this thing that has all of these methods of communication sort of contained within it, and texting. So you're getting text and you're sending text. Ultimately, what we're trying to do in peacetime and during a disaster, during a crisis, is this, right? The old Vulcan mind meld, right? Getting what we want to get across to the folks that we're trying to get it across to in a coherent and consistent way. And I guess my point here is, as you think about your role as a bar leader and what you need to communicate, the how you communicate and the different channels of communication are every bit as important as the message. Because you may need to tailor the message differently depending on the platform that you're using, and we all need to be very deliberate about how we're communicating through these different channels. I'm a big fan of this book called Crucial Conversations. It's a quick read, and in my opinion, it's one of the best pieces of work out there about human communications. One of the points that the authors make is when it matters most, we do our worst. Why is that? Why are we most challenged in communicating when it matters the most? The authors and some of you, I know NCBP and NABI and the BLI have all put on presentations about communications, and a number of them have pointed out this human, right, human nature, aspect of human nature, which is this thing called the amygdala in our brains, which is the fight or flight part of our brain. And during a time of disaster or crisis, guess what? That thing is going full speed and 24/7. And so it pushes us in two directions when it comes to communication. From the fight perspective, it gives us pushes us towards winning arguments, controlling the conversation. It's the fight aspect of that response. And so that takes us away from listening and really giving other people an opportunity to enter into the conversation, the dialogue that may be critical to the decisions that we need to make. The other response is flight. And that's the, reluctance to make the decisions that need to be made and kind of running away and hiding, going into our home office, laying down on the floor and getting into a fetal position and hoping that nobody calls us, right? So fight or flight, and that's just natural. And so what we need to recognize, and again, I'm sure this is old news to everybody on the session today, participating in the session, is we need to recognize that that's natural and that it's happening and that we control that, right? That we're built that way and that we can control that and avoid that default if we're going to a fight or flight mode. So how do we communicate? What are some special, aspects of communicating during a disaster or during a time of crisis? This comes from the Crucial Conversations book. Begin with the outcome in mind. What is it that you ultimately want to achieve in your communication? Do you want people simply to know something about the organization, what it's doing? You want to share information? Do you want to stimulate, motivate, or influence action, or a combination of both? But in creating the message, you begin with thinking about that outcome. Is it information, action, or a combination of both? And you want to listen to the folks that we talked about. You want to, when you have time, and I should provide a little caveat here. Sometimes, and I think it's rare in the bar world, although I think sometimes we tend to make it more urgent than it needs to be. Sometimes we need to make a quick decision and we don't have time to reach out. And then you've got to go with your gut and your experience. But generally, we have time to formulate a message. And so we need to listen to experts, our team, trusted advisors. Need to demonstrate that empathy that I talked about, to our members. Maybe we understand that practicing law is difficult right now. And here's some things that maybe the bar has to offer in terms of help. Our audience and the language that we're using is part of this empathy, softening our language, recognizing who the audience is, and then that should then drive the ultimate message. But beginning with what it is that we want to achieve first. What's the outcome that we're looking for? Okay, now let's talk about making decisions in the last 10 or 15 minutes here. And I think this is really probably some of the more important observations that I have to share with you today. First, I'm a big fan of this rule that General Powell, Colin Powell, is famous for. It's called the 40-70 rule. And the idea here is that if 100% of the information you need is the amount of information you need to make a decision, right? To be 100% sure that if you wait to acquire that 100% of information before you make a decision, you've lost an opportunity. You've lost opportunity. It's too late to make a difference. If you gather less than 40% of the information necessary to make a good decision, then you're reckless. You're making a reckless decision. Sounds very scientific, sounds very mathematical, and of course it really isn't, right? Because how do you measure what's 100%? So it really, you have to rely somewhat on your instincts. But the point here is that you have to go with the information that you have sometimes and not wait to get 100% of the information that might be available. Because if you wait that long, then it's too late to make a difference, or the people that have to execute the plan don't have enough time to do it well. So that's the 40-70 rule. The next approach to decision-making during time of crisis is to avoid the urgent trap. And what do I mean by that? I mean that everything can seem urgent during these times. People's anxiety is up, their stress level is up, and so everything takes on this sense of urgency. And again, I'm going to tap into another military model, this one from General Eisenhower. But if you were to Google the Eisenhower decision matrix, you would find that corporate America has adopted this, and you'll see it in lots of corporate training materials. So it started with General Eisenhower when he was Supreme Commander, and then has carried forward to today in terms of its relevance. What I like about it is it provides a mental framework for what kinds of decisions you need to handle. Actually, it works great even during peacetime, but during a time of crisis or disaster, it's very helpful. His point is that issues can be broken down into 4 categories: those that are urgent and important, those that are important but not urgent, those that are urgent and not important, and those that are not urgent and they're not important either. And so his philosophy was, as leaders, we need to focus on the urgent and important. And that may be something you need to apply as board members come to you or staff comes to you with issues that aren't necessarily urgent and important. And you need to express some empathy when it's not in that category. I understand you're concerned about this, but we can put this off. It's important, but it doesn't need to be decided today. And so we'll schedule, we'll put this off till next week, next month. We don't have to make a decision today. If it's urgent and not important, his philosophy was to delegate that. And then, of course, if it's not urgent and not important, then just don't do it. And again, I'm not suggesting that you take out a piece of paper and diagram this out every time a decision lands on your desk. You get the phone call, Madam President, we need you to make this decision. But that in the back of your mind, you kind of apply this matrix, and it'll help you really focus on the things that need to be decided. Because let's face it, during these kinds of situations, during times of crisis and disaster, there are all kinds of matters coming to you in a rapid succession. So being able to triage these matters, I think is very helpful. And I love this Eisenhower decision matrix, and have used it during my career. A couple more thoughts about decision making. I think I got a C+ in psychology, and that may be too generous. Maybe it was a C, but I do remember this from my psychology class in college. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Where are we right now as a society? And remember, our bar members, our fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, they're real people dealing with all of the same things that the rest of society are dealing with. And where are we right now in terms of hierarchy of needs? I think we're here. I think most people are worried about their physiological needs, food, water, paying the bills, keeping the lights on, their security, their safety. Oh my gosh, am I going to get the virus? Maintaining social distance. What do I need to do to keep myself safe, to keep my family safe? That's where we're at. Are there legal problems that people are facing out there? No doubt. No doubt that the legal problems. But let's face it, I don't know what it's like in your state, but here in Arizona, courts are closed for business. Other than serious criminal matters, all the civil matters, civil courts have been shuttered. Most of the dockets have been put on hold. And so there will be legal issues, and legal issues are going to continue to be part of how we figure out as a society, some of the new laws passed by Congress that affect the workplace, some of these things that have just been recently passed, some of these bills that have been passed about getting money into the hands of Americans. All of those things, right, are things that lawyers can help sort out. And so, maybe the role for bar associations and organizations now, to the extent we've got people that can look at those things, can help inform the public, help inform our members, those kinds of things. But really, right now, when I was in Homeland Security and the Red Cross, we always divided disasters into two categories: disaster response and disaster recovery. Legal matters tend to be in the recovery phase. After these basic needs are met, then people start to address their legal needs. I think that's going to be true for our current situation. And so keeping that in mind in terms of what should our focus be as bar leaders, well, I think our focus should be making sure that our staff, our board, our members of our association, that they're safe, and that they're tending to the things that they need to do to basically stay afloat. And there may be some things that bar associations, and I've been on a couple websites that are sharing with members about how to work more effectively remotely, those kinds of things. Those things are all helpful, because that's really part of this lower part of Maslow's hierarchy. But thinking about putting together clinics for pro bono assistance to people that are facing legal issues associated with this disaster, probably going to come later in the process. 1/3, 2/3 rule, last piece about decision making. Look, if you've got to make a decision, you want to give the people that have to execute that decision time to do it. And typically, or maybe not typically, but sometimes what leaders do is they sit on a decision for 2/3 of the time necessary to make that decision a reality, and they give the people that have the responsibility to execute that decision very little time to do it well and execute it effectively. And so this is an old Army rule that I think applies in any human institution. If you're a decision maker, you're a leader, take up only 1/3 at the most of the time necessary to get something done, in terms of reaching out to experts, talking to people, getting the information you need to make the decision, or for the group to make a decision if the board has to make a decision. Don't wait till the night before, the day before your next conference to let the participants know, the staff know, the hotel know that you're canceling. And I don't mean to offend anybody by that comment, but the truth of the matter is, sometimes you have to take some risks, and you have to make a decision far enough in advance, recognizing that you'll be criticized for it. Many of the decisions we make as leaders, we're criticized during peacetime. It's going to be amplified and exaggerated during the disaster crisis. But the 1/3, 2/3 rule is really critical, especially since people are hamstrung right now, right? It's tougher to get things done. So build in some time for your bar staff or your volunteers to change direction, to shut something down, to set something up. But don't sit on the decision to the last minute, because especially during times like these, it really makes things worse, really adds to the panic, and maybe exacerbates the disaster. Two qualities that I think are important as leaders during always, actually. One is humility. Recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that we really have to rely on one another, especially during times like these. We really have to pull together, and it is truly a team effort. And being humble enough to recognize that we simply don't know it all, and we need to rely on others. And going back to my point about successors, really making sure that there are people that you are keeping in the loop, and that you are pumping up to take your place if necessary. And that takes a bit of humility as well. Interestingly enough, you would not necessarily think this. I certainly didn't. I spent, as I mentioned, 25 years in the United States Army. The Army just added humility as a essential quality to its leadership doctrine. That's not, what most people think about Army leaders, right? You think of the Patton movie and generals bossing people around. Even the United States Army this past year recognized the essential quality of humility, having the ability to recognize and have the perspective that you need to rely on others to help you make good decisions and be an effective leader. And the last point I make is forbearance. Gosh, if there was ever a time to cut each other some slack, cut everyone really some slack. Everybody's struggling. Everybody's trying to do the right thing. We're not always going to get it right. Our government leaders aren't always going to get it right. And we're not always going to get it right. And so exercising some forbearance, some restraint and tolerance, particularly during these times, I think helps us be a better leader. And again, really helps us maintain that calm and confident outlook that we need to maintain. Okay, quick recap, and then I'll let Joanne chime in here with some questions or comments that you may have had. My recap is really simple. Start with you, identify a relief picture, practice the leadership fundamentals, maintain and model calm, listen, be more elephant than hippo, express and exercise genuine, authentic empathy, communicate and recognize you've got all those channels that you've got to deal with. Make decisions, make timely decisions, recognize you can't get it right every single time, and then exercise some humility and forbearance as you walk through this journey. Again, I wish all of you the best. I hope I've helped a little bit today. If not, feel free to shoot me some notes, and I will make the presentation available to Joanne so she can share with the rest of you. But that's it for me right now, and I will open up for questions.
Thank you, John. We do have a few questions, and I want to encourage everyone, if you have any questions, to go ahead and use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and type them in. The first question is, do you have any advice on keeping your bar president or board of governors from quickly jumping to decisions without allowing you some level of due diligence before decision made with diplomacy and tact?
Wow. Now there's a great question, right? So I have some advice, and it depends on the people, right? So this is again the soft skills piece. I think I would begin by empathizing and saying, hey, look, guys, I know that you want to make decisions and that this is a critical time and that you're anxious, and I get that. But our responsibility as an organization is to act responsibly, right, and reasonably. And so what I ask you to do is kind of come along with me. But I think, in fairness to the folks that are pressing you, you may want to sort of set out some parameters. I'd like to make the decision by Monday or Tuesday or by tomorrow, and here's what I'm doing in order to make that decision, or here's the information I think we need as a board to make that decision. And then get some feedback, and get some buy-in from your board that, okay, here are the steps that we're going to take. Now, you may always have an outlier or two, right? You're always going to have that board member that just is sort of the Lone Ranger. But I think generally most board members, particularly the kinds of people that volunteer to serve on our bar boards, recognize the importance of doing the due diligence. Again, keep the 40-70 rule in mind. So if you're out there wanting 80 or 90%, then maybe your board folks that are pressing you are right. Maybe you're gonna miss the window of opportunity. But applying the 40-70 rule, feel free to use that model with your board, and then empathizing with their anxiety about it, and then setting some parameters. I think maybe some of those things might be helpful in terms of backing folks down a little bit and getting them on board.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple more questions. One is about the matrix you showed on decision making. How do you determine what is important and urgent when everything seems critical and different members have different points of interest?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some. I think there are some common things that we would all agree are both urgent and important. I think anything right now dealing with people's safety and well-being is both urgent and important. I think decisions about more routine kinds of things, maybe issues relating to board agendas or board meetings, those kinds of things. I mean, I think people want to know that you're thinking about those things, and that you're kind of coming up with what are we going to do in the future. Those I mean, I somebody from the Division of Bar Services shared with me in getting ready for this presentation that they had gotten a phone call. And again, not to offend anybody, but somebody was worried about how they were going to pass the gavel. Can you still hear me, Joanne? I'm getting a connection signal.
Yes,
You good?
you
Okay.
froze for a second, but you're good now.
Okay. So, the bar president got a call, or a bar president called DBS and said, our passing the gavel ceremony was supposed to happen next month, and how are we going to do that? How am I going to make the transition to the president-elect when we can't meet and all of those kinds of things? That's not, it's not unimportant, but it's not urgent. And certainly there are workarounds to making that transition. And the ceremonies and the meetings and the things that we have planned, guess what? They're just not going to happen. And so I think you have to break it down. That's what lawyers do, and really honestly take a look at those things that affect safety, the existential elements of the organization. Those things are important, but traditional things that bars do. I had a question from a colleague of mine said, one of the sections wanted to put on a CLE, and by God, they were going to come into the bar building and put it on, even though there was a directive from their governor that said, we don't do meetings. And that CLE can happen next year or not at all, right? I mean, I think generally we can sort those things, and then the close calls you just gotta make the call, and you may get it right, you may not, but you've got to make that call. I don't know if that was helpful, but I gave it my best shot.
Great. Yeah, we do have a few more. I think we have a couple more minutes.
Sure.
Let's see. This is from Nate Alder. John, I am hearing from many who think things will get better and back to normal, so we just need to get through the next few weeks, open things back up, reschedule things, etc. But I feel like it will be a long road to recovery with lots of ripple effects. Pass fail at law school, members who don't renew at the bar, firms that change or don't recover, unemployment, problems now with clients who can't pay, dislocations throughout the profession. All of that indicates to me that bar leaders need to pause, think deeply, and envision paths forward. What are your gut instincts telling you what we will see in the coming months? How would you advise an organization to not miss this contemplative moment?
Wow. I love Nate. He's an old friend. And I wish we had started the session with that statement. I think he's spot on. There's so much we don't know. What we do know is that things are being disrupted in every aspect of life and in every aspect of the legal profession. And so, yeah, I think my gut feeling, and again, I haven't been through a pandemic. It's funny because I spent a number of years in Homeland Security and the Red Cross planning for pandemics and training for pandemics. But boy, it's a different kettle all for sure once it's actually here. I think I heard Stanley McChrystal, who's a famous Army general, on the news this morning talking about this will change our society forever, right? For going forward. things are going to change in terms of how we do business even after we come out of it. One thing I would say for bar leaders in the Nate's suggestion that we contemplate is, to the extent that bar associations can give and do things for its members now and not worry about the cost. I think now is, and you're going to win the hearts and minds of your bar members. And there are all kinds of different things, and you can think about those. But I think we tend to worry, and you're seeing it played out on the political scene, so much about the economics. And I get that. I mean, you know, you can't ignore the economics. But if economics is driving all of our decisions, we're not going to make the right decisions. And so I think opening up our coffers, dipping into our reserves, and doing everything we can to help our members cope with the current situation. You're going to, even if they can't pay their annual dues, when we come out of this, you're going to win the hearts and minds of your membership, and they're going to love you for it. But you got to take some risks. And so I think that would be, you know, some additional thoughts to what Nate's already presented for all of us. But he's spot on. Kind of hard to add to that comment.
Okay, we have a couple more. Do you have any advice on deciding how often is too often to send communications to members, while there seems to be an avalanche of communications from so many sources right now, maybe a weekly digest, unless there is something urgent to relay?
Yeah, you know, this is one of those where I think you can reach out to some trusted advisors within your organization, you know, or colleagues that aren't necessarily in the inner circle. You know, I think bar junkies, as we like to call ourselves, you know, we love hearing stuff from the bar, and we read it all, and we don't have any, you know, we have an appetite for that. But maybe polling some of your folks that will tell you the honest truth about how much is too much. And honestly, you just got to do your best here. I don't think you can over communicate the message, whatever messages you're trying to get out. I think internal communications are really important with staff. So for those associations that have staff, we tend to focus on getting the word out to our members, out to the public, but also keeping them in the loop. So I would emphasize letting your internal team know what's going on. Actually, it's even better to let them know before you send stuff out to the members, because the members may be then coming back and responding, and the staff has to deal with it. So, you know, you're seeing some great models out there. You see some short, concise, daily messages going out. Weekly messages is okay. I think more than once a day, unless it's something really extreme, is probably too much. But a daily quick note, maybe pointing to you know, a tool or a website that's helpful. I know the ABA just put up a bunch of stuff, practice pointers and you know, continuity of operations plans and stuff like that. You don't have to regurgitate all of that. It can be, hey, you know, here's a quick thing that might be helpful, but just to maintain that connection and relationship with your members. I think once a day is plenty if you wanted to do it once a week, but be consistent. That would be my only, you know, don't sort of make it happenstance. Create a routine. Remember, we talked about routines with your communications. I think makes it something that folks expect to see.
Okay, great. We have one more question, and just a reminder, if you do have additional questions, go ahead and type them in the Q&A, and I will forward them to John and he can respond offline. But here's the last question we'll be able to address during this session. Besides taking deep breaths, what are good techniques to deal with high personal frustration levels in people who are negative or Chicken Little types?
Yeah. Well, don't increase your alcohol consumption. That would be my first advice, right? So I just saw a report about how substance abuse is starting to grow. And of course, we in the legal profession have that, right? We already know from the Hazelton study from several years ago that that, you know, we have a tendency in our profession to go to the bottle or other means of sort of relieving the pain. So I say that part tongue in cheek, but for real. I think honestly, for me, that daily exercise of some kind really makes a difference, because it takes some of that energy away and gets those endorphins moving, so that when you're faced with the, you know, sort of frustrating, antagonistic maybe person, you're able to deal with it in a much more calm, deliberate way. But I think if we don't move, if we don't have an outlet for our bodies, and it can be anything: yoga, a walk, running on a treadmill, jumping jacks, fill in the blank. I think for me personally, that's how I've dealt with stress and anxiety throughout my career. Even in the most difficult times, always found a way to spend some time each and every day, you know, getting some kind of exercise, so that my nerves and energy was at the right level.
Great. Thank you so much to John for sharing your insight, and to all of you who are able to join us today. Please feel free to get in touch with us at the ABA Division for Bar Services or to the National Conference of Bar Presidents if you have any questions or comments to share about this or any upcoming programming. And as John mentioned, I'll be sending the presentation to everyone along with a recording of the session. And everyone, hang in there and have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, everybody.